Hello everybody, my name is Claudia Molinari. My talk is going to be, personal. It's going to be about how I design video games and what is the process behind what I do and how I tackle style in general. Together with Matteo Pozzi, I'm co-founder and creative director of Weird Muesli, an indie game studio based in Milan, in Italy. Example coming from different forms of entertainment, that this visual combination is not new to our eye. On the top left, we have the work of Moebius, a French cartoonist who was born in 1938, and he was very active during the 70s. On the top right, a frame from Steven Universe, an animation which first appeared in 2013. And on the bottom, the successful indie game Bury Me, My Love. They all share a similar imaginary, the result of the visual DNA I was talking about. Although as stated, this shade today is used to represent future and visionary thinking, it is also the shade used for the visual language often associated to one of the most researched topics in the past 30 years, climate change, a common issue part of our context. So in nature, this is crucial. It's crucial to observe what the context is in order to understand the visual DNA. So if in nature nothing is created, nothing is destroyed, and everything is transformed, it is also true in pop culture. And this is again another exercise of mine that I made when I was working on my first video game based on the work of Hieronymus Bosch, a painter during the 15th century. You can see how some iconography traveled across time, like for example those different selection through time. So if originality is dead, this could be argued. It's a little bit depressing thinking that originality is dead, leading us to visual and art nihilism. I don't think it's dead, I just think originality is rare. So when I make my games, I always ask myself, how can I be visually original? There are so many visual inspirations out there on the net. It's really hard to cope with the ever-going struggle between originality and repetition, novelty, recognizability, chaos and order. So at some point, I realized that I had to find my own path. When I was younger, I was determined, but I was really confused. I was interested in many different things that apparently were not related to each other. Only when I started to work in video games, a little bit like the quote that Mary read before, I started to understand that I could make connection with all my experiences, hobbies, and things that I like in one working path. And all those dots that apparently were not related started to communicate with one another, helping me to understand me better, helping to shape my visual eye. I stopped looking outside and I started to look inside, and I found that professionally, I was loving more my hobbies than my actual job. In fact, everything I loved were things that I had to drop because of my job. Things that I dropped, or they were gone, or left, or lost for years. So reconciling with all the lost energies I spent in times that have dissolved was a real challenge, and I called this the art of tracing the lost. I'll go very fast because time is ticking, but it's important to look back at those paths you undertook that somehow have gone or you have never finished. To me, was social anthropology and performing theater arts. They were topics that I deeply loved and sadly dropped. But again, this is an animation, and I understood that animation are not working with my presentation. But when I started to work as an illustrator, and somehow things started to make sense, and those fields that I dropped emerged through my visual style, being like colors that I took from some ethnographies that I studied, or compositions, or subjects. So at one point, my work was a lot about symbology and surrealism and theatrical drama. There were aspects that I always researched in those dropped studies, and that I used in my work even before working in video games. I also always been interested in human emotions, but most of all on the mask that people use to hide or emphasize their feelings, like you do in theater. This is why with Yuan, a game that we made in 2005, Yuan is the Chinese word to say courtyard, and it's a simple falling block game inspired by the Chinese tradition. I explored the Beijing opera theater as a form of representation to add drama and color and pathos to the game. The project ended up into a collaborative game between 4 people. Players have to pass and receive blocks, talking, collaborating, and sharing a strategy, even between people they didn't know or to strangers, in order to complete the full grid in an abstract and playful reproduction of the traditional sociality. Among the other things that I lost, I researched from a personal side my lost roots. I started to think about my roots when I started to question myself about creativity in general. So if creativity was a logo, what would it be? So I found my definition. This is me with different hair. I have Sicilian origins. I don't know if you can see. Yeah. I'm very keen to my ancestry, so the next person is my mother, her mother, and mother, and so on. And this is creativity to me. Like a snowflake, creativity is not original. It's a combination of things that you keep and things that you lose over time. So creativity is transformation. It's always same but different somehow. I exploited this topic when I developed The Great Palermo, a game about the city of Palermo in Sicily. When we moved there to make the game, I discovered that this place was not just an incredible source of visual references, but it was an amazing pool full of stories coming from the past inhabiting the very present. My research became the backdrop of the game, but the real protagonist is genealogy. A topic is really dear to me, something that is so related to my lost roots. This is why I wanted to make my character all looking different but all looking the same. My love for human sciences led me to rituals. I collect lost rituals. I collect popular story. That is why you often find me to speak to strangers, and often could be weird. But I research folklore. Folklore is not always explicit as the images that you see. Folklore is often implicit, like hidden and forgotten. Like this example, those are images I took in Palermo in order to find the right color palette. And I wanted the color palette coming from the city and not coming from what I was thinking about the city. So those are urban traces of local habits. Between all ritual I researched, the one that I like the most are the one related to cards. When you play an old card game, people are more relaxed and willing to tell you untold stories. I spent the summer in Basilicata, a small region in southern Italy. I was invited there for an art residency to make a graffiti using a local crafting technique. This is the team. I immediately looked for legends and superstitions, and I found that nearby there was a village nobody wanted to talk about. People believes it brings great misfortune if the name of this town is pronounced aloud. So I won't pronounce it because I love you and I don't want you dead. It was only by playing cards with some old people that I managed to know more about this place. In general, I make great use of cards, above all tarots. I use them for teaching game design. I think they're great for storytelling, character design, and I love how those old archetypes can well integrate themselves with modernity, like this work I found on the internet. I use tarots in my games a lot, especially when I made my first video game, Cave Cave Deus Videt. It's a visual novel inspired by the work of Bosch, Dutch painter of the 15th century, where the feu rouge that connects the work of the painter with the protagonist through iconography and symbology. Last but not least, lost objects. As a traditional designer, I have many boxes divided into categories with objects I've collected through times. When I was about to make the graphic style of Ventimesi, 20 Months, a collection of very short stories about Italian resistance, I had no clue what to do. Our games, as you can see, are very low in technology, so I had to come up with something new. I went through my boxes and I found a matchbox. When I moved to Milan in 2005, my dad gave me a matchbox, telling me one day you might need it. It was weird, but I said okay. My dad was a kid during the war, and he said to me that in those years, having even a single match meant survival. When I held the box in my hands, I knew it was the perfect visual language to use. 20 Months, it's a game about people and their short stories during the war, and I wanted my story to last just about the same amount of time it takes for a match to burn completely. In the box were other things like this old postcard from Matteo's grandfather. He wrote this postcard from a Nazi camp to his sister. And we turned the text into a game mechanic that visually tells the story of a married couple. So the visual metaphor of the matches was an extraordinary hint to work on the full game. So to conclude, how can I be visually original in my video games? Tracing from my own experience as an indie video game designer, the importance of involuntary memory and the influence of personal and cultural identity of my context has significantly influenced my visual design process. My inspiration, as I said, comes from lost and dropped path, ancestry, folklore and rituals, objects. All those things help me working through the chaos of visual trends I live in order to make my game look somehow different. So to conclude, personal memories are the biggest archive, the place where personal trends are formed. We must observe the steps that we make and make artistic and cultural profit out of it. And talking to all the creative people in the room, not all of those wander into their style being words or visual or sounds are lost. Thank you.